Hello students, welcome to our video lecture. This lecture is titled From Oral Interpretation to Performance, and we are going to introduce the discipline of performance studies in this presentation. In Module 1, you learned the basics of how to perform oral interpretation of literary texts, specifically of prose literature. But in Module 2, in our module this week, we are going to decenter the term text from that of literature to that of the texts of everyday life. But how did this evolution happen? Let us look at how three approaches to oral interpretation, elocution, expression, and impression, eventually gave rise to the discipline of performance studies. Let us start with elocution from the 1800s. Okay, so the elocution came from the word elocution. If you are familiar with the canons of rhetoric, it was also covered in that. It came from the Latin word eloqui or elocutus, meaning to speak out. And it is originally referred to as effective literary or oratorical style. So when we talk about the approach of elocutionists, this is actually the traditional or stereotypical way to perceive the course of speech communication, where you are being taught how to speak well and how to use your voice and body well to communicate a message. If you have already taken Speech 30, a big part of the course is to teach you how to use your voice and body to deliver effective speeches, right? And in the old curriculum of the BA Speech Communication program, we actually have voice and diction, which is focused on how to pronounce words well, how to use diction well to communicate and to do effective public speeches. Now, let's look at the elocution approach to oral interpretation and how it became a big part of the foundation of speech communication as a field and eventually of performance studies. All right, so when we talk about the elocutionists, their main concern or their obsession actually is proper way of oral delivery. So let us look at the famous works of the elocutionists. So let's talk about Thomas Sheridan. Thomas Sheridan is a dramatist, and his main concern is to go against artificialities. Okay, and he wanted to advocate for natural conversation when doing oral interpretation. That's why he's also called the leader of the natural school. According to Thomas Sheridan, nature gives to the passions and the emotions certain looks, tones, and gestures, meaning before you're able to deliver a good oral interpretation performance, you must be emotionally attuned to that piece of literature, and that emotion will eventually show in the tone of your voice, and the look of your face, and the gestures that you make. Now, because he wanted so bad to focus on the natural delivery when it comes to oral interpretation, he set up a system of markings and cues on how to produce these natural tones and gestures. Okay, so just imagine that during this time, if you are studying oral interpretation, you have a book of markings of how to position your hand, your arm, your face, if the emotion portrayed is being happy. You have to memorize a series of cues and marks about how to deliver the emotion of sadness, etc., etc. Now, John Walker, another elocutionist, okay, actually attempted to refute Thomas Sheridan's style and also gave us some systems of markings and cues to focus on vocal tempo, inflection, and tone. So while Thomas Sheridan advocated for the natural school, John Walker advocated for the mechanical school of delivering presentations. We also have other elocutionists here. We have James Berg, who wrote an essay on elocution and pronunciation. We have James Rush, voice management is not an art but a science. Okay, and of course Francois Delzart, that focused his life work on calisthenics and bodily action. If you're going to observe these two photos here in the lower right and center, you will see an example of how Francois Delzart created some cues or markings on how to portray emotions well through bodily action. And in the lower right portion, we can see John Walker's way of showing us how to use the voice, the mouth, to pronounce certain words well. Okay, one critique that the elocutionists received later on is that as they tried their best to provide us with a system to make oral interpretation more natural, it actually became more mechanical because they were so concerned on the proper way to speak and to express emotions that we forget about the individuality of each performer and how much more they can give to the text when they perform it. So this critique led to the rise of the expressionists. This is the second approach to oral interpretation, and this happened during the Romantic era. So while teachers are already criticizing the mechanical nature of the elocutionists, the expressionists came into action, and this time what is focused is the comprehension of the thought. Okay, so as you can see here, we have Samuel Silas Curry, who wrote about the province of expression, and his mantra in oral interpretation is to think the thought. So if you read a text and you perceive that the character here is expressing sadness, okay, you just express whatever it is that you think the literature is saying. So just express the thought, just think the thought. That is the mantra of Samuel Silas Curry. And we also have Charles Wesley Emerson, who wrote about the evolution of expression. And according to him, Charles Emerson actually is also a reverend, a pastor, that the vocal technique involved in expressionism and the gymnastics involved in just expressing whatever it is that you feel is being derived from the text has therapeutic effects. There is also what we call the Chautauqua Institution. These are groups of Sunday school teachers all over the United States who organize summer camps, nationwide book clubs, where readers, lecturers, and performers were invited to speak and read out loud their favorite books and favorite pieces of literature. They even say that Charles Dickens was frequently invited to join the Chautauqua Institution, and he read his pieces out loud. Okay, and so because of these institutions and these approach to literature, expression, just think the thought, just express the thought, there became a greater love for literature among people. However, in the academic setting, of course, when we talk about approaching texts, it should not be confined only to whatever it is that you think the meaning of the text is. Okay, there has to be a sort of criticism and an intellectualization to your analysis. So let's look at the third approach to oral interpretation, the impressionist approach. This is actually the method that you did in your prose performances in Module 1, because you underwent analysis first before you were able to write a dramaturgical plan and eventually perform your piece. You made a dramatistic analysis and the modal analysis of your piece. And impressionists, as what is written in the interpretation of the printed page by Solomon Clark. Interpretation is communication, where the interpreter derives information from the text and relays this information to the audience. And when we talk about deriving information from the text, it's not just, whatever it is that you feel the text is saying. You need to really understand the setting of the characters, who the characters are, what the message of the entire piece is. And during this time, in the 1970s, literature is already being exposed to feminist criticism, where the role of women is being explored in these texts. We have Marxist criticism when we look at literary text and examine how socioeconomic class is being portrayed. And we also have post-colonial criticism. How are colonists being described in these texts? How is emancipation being communicated, etc., etc. So these are very important lenses to emphasize in the texts. And so expressionism is no longer the go-to way in oral interpretation. There needs to be analysis involved, whether it's feminist, Marxist, post-colonial, or dramatistic, which is also rhetorical in a sense. This approach in oral interpretation, impression, and the rise of critical theory actually paved the way to the discipline of performance studies. In what way? As literary theory began to reflect the insights obtained through deconstruction, post-structuralism, and the decentering of the literary text, contemporary interpretation theory had to confront new concepts of text, right? So we now have the text of the body. So this paradigm shift from literature to everyday life is one of the factors that led to the conception of performance studies. And when we talk about the text of the body, we now analyze everyday life performances, cultural performances, the experience of underrepresented groups, constituting identity and the self, and specific interventions in the world, like activism. Now, when we talk about performance studies, we have two traditions. All right. So the first tradition is born from New York University at the Tisch School for the Arts. Okay, so this tradition of performance studies was conceived by Richard Schechner, the author of Performance Studies and Introduction, and Victor Turner, the person behind the theory of social drama. Now, NYU's performance studies developed from the intersection of theater, dance, performance art, and the social sciences, and broadened to encompass gender and queer studies, post-structuralism, post-colonial studies, and critical race theory. If you're going to look at it in the perspective of the Department of Speech Communication and Theater Arts, the Theater Arts Division is more related to the NYU brand of performance studies because it talks about the interrelationships of theater, dance, performance art, and the social sciences. Now let's look at the second tradition of performance studies, the one coming from the Northwestern University School of Communication. So NU's version of performance studies is rooted in OI, communication, speech act theory, and ethnography, and today includes personal narrative, literature, culture, technology, and performance theory. So the NU School of Communication brand of performance studies is closer to the speech division's brand of performance. Now let's look at how the Department of Speech Communication and Theater Arts evolved throughout the decades and how it is related to how performance studies was also evolving in the United States during the latter part of the 20th century. So the College of Arts and Letters was called College of Liberal Arts in the first half of the 20th century, and the Department of English and Comparative Literature was our mother department. Okay, so what is being taught during that time is the analysis of English literature and the close reading of literature. And we have professors emeritus, Leticia Tison, Amelia La Peña Bonifacio, and Antonio Mabesa, who were literature and English professors. They were sent to the United States of America to study, and they were the ones who first saw the speech communication discipline being taught, and they realized that uh, while it is one discipline to study literature and read it, there is also another discipline being born, which is performing and translating literature into oral practice. And that is where the Department of Speech and Drama was born in 1959, when these professors came back to the Philippines and saw that there is another way to approach literature, which is performatively expressing them. In 1974, the Department of Speech and Drama became the Department of Speech Communication and Theater Arts. And at present time, the UP Diliman DSCTA is at the forefront of performative engagements. And in the BA Speech Communication program, we already have the Rhetoric and Performance track, borrowing from the Northwestern University tradition, and the MA Speech Communication currently has an ongoing API, which will also now involve performance studies paradigms. And let's congratulate the department, because just a few months ago, we already have the instituted PhD in performance studies open for enrollees. So this is the first PhD program offered by the department after more than half a century. Okay, and it's a great honor that it is in performance studies. Okay, the discipline that actually connects the fields of communication and the fields of theater arts. So basically, that is our introduction video on oral interpretation to performance. I hope that you understood how the paradigm shifted from literature to the texts of the body. So see you all in a few weeks, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the module. Bye!